Welcome to Unlocked with me, Martin Daubney, the home of common sense that speaks Britain's language. Toby Young is Associate Editor of The Spectator and Quillette. Plus, he was famously the author of How to Lose Friends and Alienate People. But now he is making friends and influencing people after founding the Free Speech Union and Lockdown Skeptics. It was in recognition of Toby's services to freedom of expression that Unlocked have made him our Free Speech Man of the Year 2020. But not everybody shares our appreciation. Toby is simultaneously one of Britain's most revered yet reviled men. What is it that gets people's goats about Toby? And after suffering such a public cancellation, where does he find the strength of spirit to pick himself up off the canvas after such a spectacular fall from grace? So Toby, you set up the Free Speech Union in February. Why?
Well, as you referred to, I myself was cancelled at the beginning of 2018. So it's quite a long story. I'll try and boil it down to its essence. But Theresa May appointed me as one of 15 non-executive directors of this new higher education regulator called the Office for Students. Because of my background in education, I helped set up 4 free schools. The government, in its wisdom, didn't release this information until 1 minute after midnight on New Year's Day 2018. I think it was just embargoed until then. But The Guardian got it into their heads that the government were trying to sneak this out under the radar because they didn't want any scrutiny of this appointment, this controversial appointment. So, the headline in The Guardian at 1 minute after midnight was, something along the lines of government tries to bury story of appointing Toby Young new universities czar. It was so inaccurate, even by the Guardian standards. It was breathtaking. But people immediately believed it, of course, and I was trending on Twitter within 5 minutes of its publication with people coming up with reasons why I wasn't a suitable person to be a university's czar. And I thought, storm in a teacup, like most Twitter storms, blow over very quickly, but it didn't. The offence archaeologists went to work. They trawled through everything I'd said or written dating back to 1987. One diligent little offence archaeologist found this essay I'd written in this book called The Oxford Myth, edited by Boris Johnson's sister, Rachel, that was published in 1987, so 31 years earlier. And they found some things I'd said in that book that they thought made me an unsuitable person to perform this august role. And people were describing it as the chumocracy at work, and there were pictures of me standing next to Boris at parties and whatnot. I mean, chumocracy at work, it wasn't a plum of any description. It was a boring job, which involved sitting on a committee 4 times a year, unpaid. It wasn't. It was something I was doing out of a sense of public duty, not because it was some fantastic form of enrichment. Anyway, the events archaeologists went to work, and for instance, and kept finding things that the press then followed up. So one offence archaeologist found a piece I'd written in The Spectator in, I think, 2001, in which I talked about Men and Motors. You're probably one of the few people I've ever told this anecdote to who actually remembers Men and Motors.
I do.
I talked about what a massive fan I was of Men and Motors, which is essentially kind of dolly birds standing next to cars, And I talked about what a fan I was of this show, and there was a particularly good programme on the show called The Glamour Game, which usually featured a different page 3 model each week. And a sub-editor at The Spectator put at the top of this piece, Confessions of a Porn Addict, which wasn't exactly what I'd said in the piece, but he thought it was funny, and the piece ran. And so someone found this on the Spectator archive. Fraser Nelson, the editor of The Spectator, said that the most searched for articles that week in The Spectator's archive, dating back to 1821, were all by me. It was all my detractors searching through the archive, looking for stuff that they could kind of pull out of context and make me seem like the worst person Theresa May could have appointed. So the Times immediately followed this up with Theresa May's university czar confesses to being porn addict, as though, I'd been put under the hot lights by the interrogators the night before and had eventually broken down and confessed my porn habit. I mean, it was just ludicrous. And it was there was a comic dimension to it all, because this was all so kind of wildly exaggerated and preposterous. But the press kind of absolutely ran with it. And a petition was started on change.org, of course, calling for Theresa May to sack me. Got 220,000 signatures. Nowadays, when people come to the Free Speech Union and complain about open letters that have been written about them, signed by 150 people, I say, 150? That's nothing, mate.
Again.
Come on, what are you complaining about? 220,000. And there was even an urgent question in the House of Commons, so various Labour MPs could kind of line up to denounce me. There was one amusing, what didn't seem funny at the time, but I tweeted some appalling thing during Red Nose Day back in, I think, 2010 on Twitter. And Theresa May was about to appear on MAR. And the Mail on Sunday had run with a front page story about this terrible thing I'd tweeted, 10 years earlier, 8 years earlier at the time. And she's not on Twitter. She didn't know what the tweet was. And it was so appalling that the Mail on Sunday couldn't bring themselves to repeat it. So poor old Robbie Gibb, who was her press secretary at the time, had to read out this thing I tweeted at sort of 3 o'clock in the morning during Red Nose Day to poor old Theresa May. So in case she was asked about it by Andrew Marr, she'd be able to kind of respond. It was ridiculous. But
what was that? What was the tweet?
It was during Red Nose Day, and there was a sort of VT about some starving people in Africa, and one virtue signaller in Wales said, "Oh my God, that was so upsetting. I've just got through an entire box of Kleenex." To which I replied, "Me too, haven't wanked so much in ages." Not particularly funny. Not my proudest moment. It's all right.
Men and Motors, you're allowed to do that.
Oh, Men and Motors, it would have gone down a storm. So that was the tweet that Theresa May was asked about. And of course, she didn't get it. She was like, "What does he mean?" And so poor old Robbie Gibbon had to then, I think, Prime Minister, that what he's saying is that he produced so much semen in respect that he needed to mop it up. Horrible. But so,
a chilling thought.
A chilling thought that this is what the poor old Prime Minister has to kind of preoccupy herself with just before being interviewed by Britain's leading interviewer on a Sunday morning show. Anyway, there was a press pack outside my house, including a Guardian journalist, and had I known that, I would have brought them out a cup of tea, but I'd run out of soy latte. Anyway, I can joke about it now, but at the time it was bloody traumatising. To be at the centre of a storm and to have a pack outside your house, to being denounced in the House of Commons, 220,000 people calling for your head, constant, unending attacks on Twitter, Facebook, in the mainstream media too. Pretty difficult. You feel pretty isolated when that's happening to you. And I eventually, against my better judgment, resigned from the Office for Students and apologised for some of the sophomoric things I'd said on Twitter, like the thing I just described. And I thought, well, that'll draw a line under it, hopelessly naive. What that meant, that was like throwing a bit of raw meat to a shoal of piranha fish. They scented blood in the water, and they just went completely crazy at that point and came after me in all my other jobs, including The Spectator. And I had to step down from 4 other positions, including my full-time job running an education charity. So I lost 5 positions in very quick succession within the space of about a week, and maybe 2 weeks. The Spectator, I didn't lose that job. Fraser Nelson was absolutely staunch, stood behind me at 100%.
It was the most searched articles, presumably. They were quite pleased.
I don't know if they were pleased, but he wasn't about to sack me over it. And having gone through that experience, and been well and truly cancelled. I mean, I was persona non grata. I was what was the word that Hillary Clinton used? I was a deplorable.
The original deplorable.
I was one of the first. And I got through it because, I'm happily married, I've got 4 kids, home life's all fine. I think if it's a sex scandal that brings you down, it's much tougher because you haven't got that safe haven. But I had that safe haven, and so that helped. I lost about half a stone during this kind of week of kind of intense scrutiny. So I thought, well, bugger it, if I've lost half a stone, I might as well lose a bit more weight if I can. And I went on this kind of fitness jag and exercising a lot, really helped. I think when you're going through something like that, it can easily trigger a depressive episode, even if you don't have any sort of history of mental illness, which I don't. But certainly several people who have been cancelled and who are prone to depression, it has triggered a kind of massive episode. And I think I can think of 6 people who've committed suicide as a result of going through one of these experiences. Anyway, at the time, I thought, one of the kind of most difficult things about it was the sense of isolation, of not knowing where to turn to for kind of advice and support. I could ask friends in the media a little bit, for a bit of advice, but for the most part, when you're going through something like that, when you're being targeted by a kind of blood-crazed mob, no one wants to come anywhere near you. I think if I stand between him and the mob, they'll come for me too. Some of my friends stood by me, and for the most part, I had a good experience from that point of view. Not many, 1 or 2, but not many kind of said, "Oh no," not many denounced me in order to protect themselves.
At what point did you decide to set up the Free Speech Union? Because you obviously went through this a big period of like internalisations, searching, losing weight, getting fit, and then why did you start it?
Yeah, well, so after I'd gone through that, I thought it would have been incredibly helpful if there was an organisation like a trade union that existed to protect free speech. And so when someone is cancelled or targeted for cancellation, and if they're a member of this organisation, they can turn to that organisation for help, for media and PR advice, for legal help if necessary, for counselling if they need counselling. And that was really the wellspring of the idea. That was the seed of the idea for the Free Speech Union. And I then sort of carried this idea around for a bit. And then I attended I was invited to this conference at Cambridge, at Oxford, of all these cancelled academics who wanted to talk about what they'd gone through. And the purpose of it was to see if they could figure out a way to kind of better protect people who, like them, had been targeted for cancellation in future. And I thought, well, now is the time to bring this idea to fruition. So I wrote a piece for Quillette saying I wanted to do this and inviting people who wanted to help to contact me, and lots of people did, and out of that emerged a kind of a core group of people, and together we set up the Free Speech Union in February of this year. It's been, extraordinarily successful. We've now got, more than 7,000 members. We've had a number of kind of high-profile victories, and now whenever someone is targeted for cancellation, or when someone loses their job or gets kicked out of university or is put through a disciplinary process simply for exercising their lawful right to free speech, they come to us. Not everyone, but for the most part, they come to us for help, and in some cases we really can help them.
So you've got 7,000 members. Can you give us a kind of an idea of the diversity and the breadth of issues that come to you? Like we spoke to Nick Buckley on Unlocked from Mancunian Way, an extraordinary tale, and he said everybody should join the Free Speech Union. And he said a really interesting thing, and that is he found it so easy to fight back against the online cowards. But what kind of people are coming through your door, and what kind of help do you give them? Yeah,
I think there is this kind of perception, or at least this smear put about by kind of, wokesters, that the only people who are concerned about the assault on free speech unfolding across every area of our society, but particularly in the education sector, the charity sector, the media. The only people who are concerned are male, pale and stale conservatives like me. And actually they're just bleating about the fact that they don't have as big a platform as they once had. They're having to share it with minorities and historically disadvantaged groups. They don't like that, so they're kicking off about it because they're babies. I sort of think, well, if only that were true, because it isn't just male, pale and stale conservatives whose speech rights are under threat. It's everybody's, and I think that's reflected in the makeup of the members. But just to give you a few examples, so one of the first cases we intervened in was Selina Todd, who was due to speak at a feminist conference at Exeter College, Oxford. And the organisers of the conference got a telephone call the day before from a couple of the trans activists who were due to speak at this conference. And they said, we can't appear on the same platform as Selina Todd. If she appears on that platform, we're pulling out. And of course, the organiser, instead of telling them to get knotted, which is what she should have said, she immediately called Selina Todd and said, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to rescind that invitation. Now, Selina Todd had helped organise the conference. She'd helped raise money for the conference. She used to be a columnist for The Guardian, and she's a professor of modern history at Oxford. But none of those things protected her from the kind of trans activists who wanted to cancel her and succeeded in no platforming her. So we intervened in that case, and we wrote a letter of complaint to the provost of Exeter College and the Bishop of Exeter, and they investigated it, and they concluded that her speech rights had indeed been violated, and they've reviewed their processes and put more robust protections for free speech in place. So that was, the number of gender-critical feminists like Selina Todd who come to us for help now is, I think it's more often them than it is male, pale and stale conservatives, because, you know, the wokesters are really out to get them, and they're completely kind of vicious about it. I mean, we saw that in the sorts of comments made about J.K. Rowling after she'd sort of questioned why you couldn't describe a woman as a woman. You know, another person we're helping is Posy Parker, a feminist activist. She was the woman who put the poster saying "Happy Birthday, J.K. Rowling" at Waverley train station, which was then taken down by, you know, Scottish Rail, or whatever it was, on the grounds that it was, you know, transphobic to wish J.K. Rowling a happy birthday. But Posy Parker, someone posted a petition on change.org saying that...
There's a theme emerging here.
saying that the word woman in the Oxford English Dictionary, which is, I think the short definition is adult human female, had to be changed because it was trans exclusionary. And so Posy Parker started a rival petition saying, no, it shouldn't be changed. The Oxford Dictionary should keep their definition of woman as adult human female, and change.org took that down on the grounds that it was hate speech. And so we're helping her.
The dictionary is hate speech.
Yeah, the Oxford English Dictionary apparently is full of hate speech now. And what they mean by that is things like defining a woman as an adult human female.
There's a lot to unpick there, but I particularly like the idea that Toby Young is becoming a standard bearer for the feminist movement.
Yeah,
I mean, that would upset and surprise a few people. None other, and here's somebody I'd like to get to, than Mr. Owen Jones. Owen tells us that cancel culture doesn't exist, Toby.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? It's like sort of Stalin claiming that show trials. What show trials? Gulag? I don't know what you're talking about. You know, he's like the witch-finder general. You know, has led so many attempts to cancel people. Some of them successful. I mean, I challenged him on air recently about being one of the signatories to this letter in The Guardian denouncing Suzanne Moore. And he sort of said that, no, we didn't mention her by name. It was like, well, you did everything but in that letter to identify her. And, you know, that resulted in her leaving The Guardian. It made her life there so difficult that she's now had to leave The Guardian. And that was because she wrote a column in which she kind of, you know, expressed a gender-critical point of view, which is now verboten at The Guardian. Extraordinary. I mean, people who say cancel culture doesn't exist, I mean, I hit them with this stat, which is... I don't know if you know about Harry Miller, but Harry Miller is an ex-copper, and he was investigated by the police because he had liked a comic verse about transgendered people. Didn't identify any transgender people by name, didn't use their wrong pronouns, nothing like that. It was just taking the mickey out of transgendered people, and in a fairly kind of light way. It wasn't vicious or or transphobic or anything like that. At least not by my reading. Anyway, the police, a trans person complained about his liking this tweet, and the police, instead of telling them to get stuffed, investigated him, came to his place of work and investigated him. They eventually concluded that he hadn't committed a hate crime, bloody obvious, but they recorded it as a non-crime hate incident. And that's now gone on his record. And if he applies for a job now as a teacher or a carer, and they do an enhanced DBS check on him, whereby they ask to see his criminal record, that will be sent to them. So that's now on his record, and that will mean he won't be able to get a job as a teacher or a carer. Now, when he took the police and the College of Policing, whose guidance the police were following, Humberside Police, to the High Court, and the judge ruled that the police had behaved like the Gestapo and condemned them for doing it, but he didn't rule that the College of Policing's guidance, which said essentially if you investigate someone for committing a hate crime and you conclude that they haven't, you should record it as a non-crime hate incident. Unfortunately, the judge didn't go further and say that's unlawful too. So Harry is now appealing that in the High Court and in the Court of Appeal, and the Free Speech Union is supporting that. But when he got his first victory, which condemned Humberside police, compared them to the Stasi, the Gestapo, quoted George Orwell. It was fantastic. The Telegraph did an FOI of all the police forces in England and Wales. See, well, how many of these non-crime hate incidents have been recorded against people's names? Answer, 120,000 over the last 5 years. That means the police have been investigating, on average, 66 people a day for doing things like liking comic verses about transgendered people on Twitter. And when these things go on these on people's records, it really does affect their employability. If they're applying for a job where they're going to be working with children, for instance.
Do you think that you keep talking about the trans issue, and it's the most aggressively fought, and it's an area that instills the most fear in those responding? But do you think that the work you're doing, and also the Tavistock revelations this week, do you think 2021 is going to be a year where that trans debate is really taken on, and do you think we can win?
Well, I'm hesitant to be optimistic about anything when it comes to free speech. I thought when I set up the Free Speech Union with various colleagues that free speech was in greater peril than at any time since the Second World War across the West. And that was definitely true in February. And I didn't imagine then that it could get much worse. But it's got much worse in the past 8 or 9 months by an order of magnitude of a combination of COVID and the energetic suppression of any COVID dissent, whether in the mainstream media, big tech, everywhere. The treatment, the attempt to cancel people who express any dissent from kind of COVID orthodoxy as kind of with the official stamp of approval of the WHO, any dissent from that. And I was discussing the assault on our civil liberties in the name of protecting us from this deadly plague with Michael Levitt. Yeah. Professor Michael Levitt, and I put a clip of that on YouTube, and YouTube took it down on the grounds that this discussion was a violation of their community standards. I appealed and pointed out that the man I was discussing this with in the video won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 2014. Do you really think you know more about this subject and this particular disease? He's the professor of structural biology at Stanford and won a Nobel Prize. Do you really think you know more about it than him? And they put it back up. But that hasn't been, those sorts of credentials haven't protected everyone. So Facebook recently took down a post by, they flagged a post by Professor Carl Hennigan and his colleague Dr. Tom Jefferson, who is one of the world's leading experts in respiratory diseases. And Carl Hennigan is the professor of evidence-based medicine at Oxford. Facebook flagged a piece they'd written for The Spectator, which was reposted on Facebook, as false. I mean, the independent fact-checker who flagged that as false, does he really think he knows more about this subject than the Oxford professor of evidence-based medicine and probably the world's leading expert in respiratory diseases? It's just ridiculous. It wasn't not just the kind of incredibly energetic attempt across all platforms to suppress COVID dissent, but also the Black Lives Matter movement. That exploded in June, and anyone who expressed the slightest dissent from even the most extreme, ludicrous, unevidenced claims being made by BLM and its outriders in the media. Anyone who questioned any aspect of that immediately targeted for cancellation, including Nick Buckley. That was Nick Buckley's story. Yeah. So it's got worse by an order of magnitude in the past 9 months.
And we had a
so
video.
Will it get better? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. But I want to talk about lockdown skeptics in a minute. But we had a video on Unlocked with Mike Eden. And that was taken down by YouTube. Former Vice President of Pfizer, who just said SAGE weren't fit for purpose, was taken down. Actually, though, it became great box office for us. So there is some...
There's a Barbara Streisand effect. And we're seeing this, a case that the Free Speech Union is deeply involved in at the moment is the dismissal of a teacher at Eton for writing a lecture and making a video of that lecture which challenged radical feminist orthodoxy, which is being taught to boys at Eton as it is in other boys' schools, in schools generally across the country. So he challenged radical feminist orthodoxy in this lecture. He said, actually, perhaps men aren't all toxic. Maybe women do benefit from men's existence in one or two ways, because he'd had the temerity to challenge radical feminist orthodoxy, and because this flew in the face of Eton's new woke orthodoxy more generally, which the headmaster, Simon Henderson, known as Trendy Hendy, has been energetically promoting at Eton for the 5 years that he's been there. I mean, at the height of the BLM protests, Eton's head of inclusion education wrote a blog post saying she wouldn't rest until the BLM flag was flying above the gate at Eton. I mean, the extent of the wokery at Eton, it beggars belief. Yeah. So this teacher challenged this orthodoxy with particular respect to the demonisation of masculinity, and in due course was fired. But one of the things he did was to put his video lecture on YouTube, and the issue over which he was eventually fired by the head was his refusal to take it down. He said, OK, I won't give it at the school, I'll take it down from the school intranet, but I want to leave it on my YouTube channel. Yeah. And the head wouldn't properly give him a good reason why he wanted him to take it down. So he didn't take it down, he got fired. He's appealing that. And who knows, the appeal may be successful. If it isn't, he's going to challenge it in the Employment Tribunal. Full support of the Free Speech Union. But because the video in question is sort of at the heart of this story, I think at the time, 2 weeks ago, when the head asked him to take it down, it had maybe 60 views. Now it's had over 100,000, the Barbara Streisand effect. So it can be, in some ways, quite helpful when these kind of censorious wokesters try and silence people they disagree with. Actually, sometimes it can just flag the existence of the heretical document or the heretical video and make it much more widely viewed.
Well, I think that is totally true. And there's something that you said in Lockdown Skeptics this week, and you tweeted this, and I want to explore about what you mean. Finally, we are beginning to have an impact. The end of this nightmare is in sight. What do you mean? Because I can't see an end to this nightmare.
I was referring to the vote in the House of Commons last Tuesday. At the beginning of November, when Lockdown 2 was introduced, there was a vote in the House of Commons, and I think 34 Conservative MPs voted against. It passed with a majority of MPs. This time round, Labour abstained, and 50 plus Tory MPs voted against, and some more abstained. And the upshot of that was that the new tier system that's been introduced across England has been introduced with the support of just a minority of MPs. You can't now claim that a majority of our elected representatives voted for that. They didn't. Only a minority did. And the majority either abstained or voted against it. And I think that does undermine the authority of the tier system. I think it does make it slightly more difficult for the police to enforce those restrictions as draconiously as they have been. And I do think it is the beginning of the end. I think next time that Boris wants to impose another set of restrictions or renew these ones, it isn't going to get through the House of Commons. It's not even going to be supported by a minority. And I think we're making progress. I think this is the beginning of the end. And I think one of the things people have been saying to me, Lockdown Skeptics is great, but what more can we do? What should we be doing? How can we end this nightmare? How can we restore our civil liberties? And my answer to them has always been, boring though this sounds, focus your pressure, funnel your activism towards the MPs in the House of Commons. If we can get enough MPs on side, that'll end this nightmare. That is the best instrument with which to do it. I mean, Parliament has largely been bypassed in this process. And it's now beginning to find its voice again and reassert itself. And if we can get enough MPs on side as Parliament reawakens, that is the instrument through which we can end this.
Another great thing you're doing on Lockdown Skeptics, you've written an open letter to Cressida Dick this week, head of the Metropolitan Police, of course, about a two-tiered policing system. It's something we talk about a lot on Unlocked. We've really seen a huge public dissatisfaction with the sense that the police stood by and allowed Black Lives Matter to rampage through the Churchill statue, set fire to the flag on the Cenotaph, yet they're putting the boot into anti-lockdown protesters. Adam Brooks, one of the fans of this show, we're a great fan of his, had 2 police officers and an environmental health officer turn up at his pub last night because somebody on Twitter had tipped them off with a 15-point checklist so he can serve food and beer. What is going on with the police? Why are they clamping down so hard on regular law-abiding citizens and allowing this chaos to ensue?
It's shocking. It's been absolutely shocking, and I think in some ways it's a good thing because it's enabled the public to see what's happened to the police. The police have been captured by the woke. Various organisations like Gendered Intelligence, Stonewall, numerous woke lobby groups are now routinely engaged to provide training to the police. And part of that training involves, if you see someone like a comic verse about transgendered people, that person is transphobic, that's hatred, that's extremism, you need to stamp that out. And the police, unfortunately, I don't think, not all the police, obviously, but the police, the senior managers, the executive tier, the leadership of the police have bought this, they've drunk the Kool-Aid, and they think it's absolutely essential that they should modernise in this way and become kind of, the thought police, essentially, to stamp out hatred, by which they mean things like defining a woman as an adult human female. The policing by consent is such an important principle. For the most part, our police aren't armed. For the most part, people aren't frightened of the police. It's not like other countries, even France. Here, we have a good relationship with the police. People have confidence they trust the police. And one of the reasons for that, probably the main reason, is that the police are answerable to the Queen. They swear an oath to the Queen. They promise to police without fear or favour. They're apolitical. They don't take sides. But we've seen them this year taking sides. And the perfect illustration was they see a group of BLM protesters, they fall to their knees in fealty to what they're protesting about and turn a blind eye to any laws being broken. They see a bunch of people, a much smaller group of people, a much less rowdy group of people actually, protesting in a perfectly peaceful way about the lockdown, and they immediately go in mob-handed, leap on them, throw them to the ground, kneel on their necks. If they'd done that to the BLM protesters, imagine the outrage. They would have been compared to the police in Minnesota. But if you're doing it to an anti-lockdown protester, anything goes. And to see that double standard, it's so obvious now that the police have become politicised. And if we want to restore the police's authority and restore that precious relationship between the British public and the police, we need to depoliticise the police. We need to go back to policing without fear or favour. And that's a big job.
How do we do that?
Well, one way to do that is one of the things the Free Speech Union has been thinking about is to try and help people stand in the upcoming Police and Crime Commissioner elections next May. And a lot of those jobs, if not all of them, in England are up for grabs. And I'm trying to encourage Harry Miller, for instance, to stand to become the Police and Crime Commissioner in Humberside, where he used to work as a police officer. If we can get enough good people into those positions, they can start the work of depoliticising the police and restoring the police's authority. It needs to happen.
Superb to see the Free Speech Union, lockdown skeptics becoming the spearhead for a political movement.
Well, we've got to be a little bit careful. We're not officially a trade union because that is a specific legal entity and, needless to say, is regulated by the trade union regulator. We're not a charity because if we were, we'd be regulated by the Charity Commission. If we get involved in politics, then we'd be regulated by the Electoral Commission. And all these regulators, as I'm sure I don't need to tell you, are left of centre, don't like things that they think of as conservative. So I think we want to avoid, if we possibly can, having to answer to regulators who'd be besieged by vexatious complainants about us. And all our time would be taken up with dealing with these kind of investigations by the regulator. So I don't think we're going to get directly involved in politics, but certainly if we can persuade or if some really good people do stand as police and crime commissioners, we'll certainly do what we can to support.
But it feels long overdue, a sort of people's uprising of common sense, to reclaim these institutions. So many have fallen, the National Trust, the police. Where will this end? Will it just keep going, or is there? I want to try and offer a message of hope Is there a positive fight back that's beginning? Because I think a lot of people are beginning to wake up. I mean, we've seen like the Daily Mail are really waking up and becoming more lockdown skeptic. Hurrah! Took long enough, but thank God they're finally at the party. Or is there simply too much control of the public sector? Is that woke mindset simply got too much of a stranglehold in the civil service and elsewhere, and particularly in academia?
Yeah, it's like an evangelical religious cult, and that point was made very strongly in a letter by one of Will Nolan, the Eton teacher's colleagues, still at Eton. Dr. Luke Martin wrote a letter in support of Will Nolan and sent it to the Vice Provost, who's going to be chairing his appeal hearing, and that was leaked to the Telegraph. It's on the front page of the Telegraph today, I think. In that letter, he said, I was brought up in a fundamentalist religious community, and it took me a long time to kind of recover from that experience. What I'm seeing at Eton with the capture of Eton by by the wokesters really reminds me of what it was like being born into that religious cult. You know, they professed to be nice, only interested in fairness, inclusion, being kinder to people. But if you're an apostate, a heretic, if you don't buy into every jot and tittle of their agenda, the viciousness with which they attack you, the unpleasantness, the authoritarianism, it all comes immediately leaping out. And he said it really reminded him of the cult he was born into. And there is a really sinister, quasi-religious dimension to it. But it has been really successful, like other evangelical religions. That's why people call it the Great Awakening. Yeah. And the success of the cult in capturing one institution after another, even bastions of kind of liberal values. I mean, the New York Times, the most famous newspaper in the world, has been famously liberal for more than 100 years. It's left of centre, but it has always published kind of right of centre opinions as well. Its op-ed pages have always been, a fairly broad church. Earlier this year, one of the op-ed editors commissioned a piece from a Republican senator. He said, if this civil unrest continues, Donald Trump should call in the army. Various young members of staff at the New York Times took to Twitter to complain that merely publishing this piece made them feel unsafe. You expect the New York Times to say, tough, if publishing an opinion you don't agree with makes you feel unsafe, maybe you shouldn't be working here. But no, they did exactly what they asked, and they sacked the editor who'd commissioned this piece. New York Times, fallen to the woke cult. You see it in universities. Universities are supposed to be bastions of free speech. They've all got these commitments to free speech written into their policies and their charters. If you can't have free speech at a university like Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge, where else is it in danger? And they've all been captured. Oxford's been reasonably robust. Cambridge, fallen to the woke cult. Chicago. The University of Chicago famously has these Chicago principles, the gold standard for academic free speech, which it is committed to upholding. Last week, students at the University of Chicago came after this professor for having posted on YouTube a couple of things, being mildly critical of affirmative action at the University of Chicago. He said admission should be on merit. We shouldn't favour certain identity groups over others, and that also applies to recruitment to faculty. Should be on merit. You wouldn't have thought that was an outrageously hateful thing to say. But he was immediately targeted by an open letter by these students and graduates and postdocs in his department to his head of department saying, you've got to get rid of this guy, you've got to denude him of his teaching responsibilities, kick him off various academic committees. We don't feel safe being taught by someone who has these hateful views. Usual balls. And the Free Speech Union started a petition addressed to the president of Chicago, Robert J. Zimmer. And we said, you have to make a statement saying that this won't stand. You need to reiterate your support of the Chicago principles, and you need to say that nothing's going to happen to this guy. If he's exercising his lawful right to free speech at your university, the university which stands by the Chicago principles, which we look to for inspiration and guidance when it comes to fighting for free speech elsewhere, you need to make a statement. 3 days later, he did. He made a statement saying, we uphold the Chicago principles. If a professor in any department says anything on a matter of, in a debate like this, exercises their lawful right to free speech, nothing can happen to them. Nothing will happen to them. So it was a fantastic, really quick victory for us, and really important, I think.
I've got a question for you, because the passion that's coming out of you, and also the steel in your eyes, I mean, it's amazing. Was that helped, do you think, by the low of you being cancelled? You know, you were on the floor. Do you think that being that low has enabled you to come back that much higher? So being cancelled has actually helped you.
I think if they do come for you, and by hook or by crook you survive, they don't kill you, then I think it does make you stronger. You know, I don't want to, quote Nietzsche, but I think in the case of the cancel mob, the fact that they did cancel me, I lost 5 positions. Everything they could dredge up about me, they did. Everything. It was like someone going through. It was almost as though people had recorded things I'd said in pubs 30 years ago, and those were dredged up. It was almost like that. And you think, well, they've done their worst. There's nothing else out there that they haven't dredged up that they can use to get me with. So now I'm sort of cancel-proof. I'm bulletproof. There's nothing they can do, nothing they can say. And this week, some investigative journalist at Byline Times, which is this kind of, you've heard of it, not many people have. It's a kind of left-wing conspiracy website.
Yes.
And they're always publishing this kind of nonsensical, kind of conspiratorial nonsense stuff. This journalist has been sort of emailing members of the advisory council of the FSU saying, did you know Toby made a speech in 2017 in which he defended scientific racism? And actually, what I did in that speech was I defended the right of scholars to investigate in these controversial areas. One big controversy is, what is the explanation for average differences in IQ between different ethnic groups, insofar as there is any? Is there a genetic component? Some, I don't think so, but some people want to investigate this. Some intelligence researchers, and I defended their right to investigate it. I didn't defend their findings or their conclusions. I just defended their right to pursue the truth as they saw it.
Yes.
But one of the things that they try and come after you with, if you're a defender of free speech, is they say, if you're defending this person's right to free speech, that must mean you're defending what they say. Critical distinction, no, you're not. You're defending their right to free speech because you believe in free speech, not because you share their opinions.
And what if it turns out that there is no proof, therefore support them looking into
exactly.
it? So dispel a bad idea by examining it.
I know, it's
That's the point.
Exactly. It's the same counter-argument against people who want to criminalise anti-vaxxers. If you're confident of your position, if you think science and logic and reason are on your side, you shouldn't be frightened of someone, challenging you in the public square. And if you're saying anyone who challenges me should immediately go to jail, that suggests you're not very sure of yourself. And you've got something to, and actually, if you are robustly challenged, your point of view won't stand up. If you want to encourage people who are anxious about taking the COVID vaccine, that actually there's nothing to worry about. It's completely safe and very effective. The way to do it is not for Boris and Piers Morgan to kind of take it on Good Morning Britain. The way to do it is to allow anti-vaxxers to set out their sceptical case in the public square and rebut it. If you say anyone who challenges this and says this vaccine might not be safe will immediately be thrown in jail, it's not going to reassure people, is it, that it's perfectly safe to take? It's just psychologically unbelievably dumb. But this guy's coming for me. He wrote to all the members of the Free Speech Union Advisory Council. Did you know? In all but using the word racist to describe me. And all that stuff was dredged up before. I've rebutted it 1,000 times. Luckily, they all told him to piss off. But no doubt this is coming down the pike. It'll be picked up by the Guardian. So I may be about to kind of face another kind of cancellation attempt by, Byline Times. I mean, I can't believe even the Guardian would take anything it says seriously. But maybe I'm mistaken.
Well, those at the Brexit Party were probed by them, and they couldn't cancel us. They couldn't stop Brexit. They haven't cancelled you. They won't stop your great work. Before we present you with your much well-deserved bottle of champagne for being our Free Speech Man of the Year, if you could get that, please. Alex, ready? It's been chilling over there. Great. How can Unlocked viewers get involved in the Free Speech Union? Well,
anyone can join the Free Speech Union. You don't have to be a journalist or an academic. Open to everyone. And if you're a student or a pensioner or a veteran, it's $24.95 a year. Full membership fee is $49.95. So, and if you do get into trouble, if the woke witch hunters come for you, we'll have your back. we will defend you. We can't promise we'll be successful, but we'll do everything we can to defend you. And so far we have been pretty successful. And one of the things I think Nick Buckley said really rang true, which is that they are bullies.
Yeah.
They hunt in packs. And if you band together and hit back, they run and hide. That's the way to defeat this mob and to defeat this horrible religious cult. It's to stand up to them in numbers. They hunt in packs. If we band together too and fight back together, we can defeat them.
An inspirational finale there. I'm going to break social distancing rules and shake your hand. Sewers, cancel us for that. Toby Young, Unlocked Free Speech Man of the Year. Please accept that. It's been nicely chilled after all that speaking.
It's very, very nice bottle of champagne. Thank you very much.
You deserve a drink. That's a real padlock. We'll take it back off you.
Fantastic.
Don't smash the bottle.
You're doing great work. I'm a real fan of Unlocked.
Thank you very much. And we're a mutual fan of yours. It's been a bit of a bromance today, a bit of a loving, but that's the point. Look, if you've enjoyed this, just bang your comments out. Get involved in the Free Speech Union. They deserve your work. It's not just for privileged, conservative, male, pale, stale guys, as you said. This is for protection of ordinary people whose jobs are being threatened by the mob, and the mob can be beaten if we join together, as Toby just so rightly said. So thanks for watching Unlocked. Get involved on Facebook and on YouTube and Twitter at Unlocked_UK_. Thank you for watching, Toby. You've been inspirational. We're going to let you go now and go and do some more brilliant work. Thank you for coming.
Great morning. Cheers.